Hey, it's Ramsey Dewey at the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Today we have a question from our friend Shadow Fall, who lives in Hawaii, and he wants to train by himself, do some boxing, but he doesn't have any equipment, and there's no gym around that has heavy bags and speed bags and double end bags and cardio machines or anything like that. So he's wondering, what do I do? Okay. I'm going to give you advice I give to everybody. Get Jack Dempsey's book, Championship Fighting, because he addresses this issue. Jack Dempsey lived through the Great Depression. He lived through all the poverty that came with the end of World War II for a lot of people, and he understood that people don't always have means to buy a brand new pair of boxing gloves or to afford a gym or even open up a gym in an area where there's nowhere to train. And so in that book, he gives very specific instructions. If you don't have a jump rope, here's how to make your own. If you don't have a pair of bag gloves, here's how to make your own on the cheap, on the down low. If you don't have a heavy bag, here's how to make your own. If you don't have a sparring partner, here's how you make your own. Go make some friends. That's valuable advice. Anyway, another thing I would recommend, one of my favorite YouTube channels, and it's not very well known, and you guys should all go check it out and subscribe to this guy. It's called The Punch Professor. He runs a gym in Florida in the United States, and it's this beautiful gym. It's all handcrafted, made out of wood, and he makes a lot of his own equipment. And he shows you how to make a lot of your own equipment as well, double end bags and variations of heavy bags and things like that. They're on his channel, and it's really cool stuff. And again, it's one of my favorite channels. I learn a lot every time I watch this guy. So go show him some love, and learn from his experience. It's good stuff. Okay, next question. All right, we got a question from our friend Sammy from Finland. Sammy is 23 years old and is a Taekwondo fighter and had a setback, tore his ACL and had knee surgery. And man, bummer. Man. Sammy's really upset and depressed about that, but can fight again, according to the doctors, in a year, but is very bummed out that he has to wait a whole year to fight again. So he says, martial arts is what I love and is the only thing that keeps me going. If you have any advice for me, I will be very thankful. I love your videos. Okay. All right, Sammy, thanks for the question. Now, every time somebody asks me a question regarding the word depression, and I address it, there are like 5 to 10 people in the comments who always say, Ramsey, it's irresponsible to answer any questions about depression because you should refer everybody to a medical professional so that they can get medication. And you know what? I don't know if you're clinically depressed or just kind of bummed that you can't compete. I would be bummed if I couldn't compete. You know what? I am bummed that I can't compete. My very last fight, I broke my skull. My opponent broke my skull, put a hole in here, depressed skull fracture in my frontal bone. And if a doctor told me, Ramsey, you can fight next year, I would be like, yes! Yes! And I'd do it today if I could. Today, right now, if I could. So I get it. I get it. Man, after that fight, that was one of the darkest times in my life, and it had nothing to do with clinical psychology and everything to do with not getting what I wanted at the time, which was an opportunity to keep competing, an opportunity to have that perfect fight. The one where you're evenly matched, the one where you're essentially fighting yourself, the ultimate opponent. So I had a few fights where I was fighting well below my skill level. Guys who really didn't know what they were doing. And I had a number of fights where I was fighting guys who were way above my skill level, like national Sanda champions, guys who fought in the UFC. And I wasn't ready for that at the time. But man, that perfect fight where you're essentially fighting yourself, where it's not a matter of, you only won because the other guy sucked, or you only lost because you were the one that sucked, but rather you won because you earned it against an evenly matched opponent. Man, that I get. I think that's what every fighter wants, but not every fighter gets. And that's That's the really, really awesome thing about combat sports. I think that's what drives really any combat sports athlete, regardless of style. And that when people say, I love it, I love competition, that's what they're talking about. Real competition. So what do you do in the meantime? Man, martial arts is everything to you. Well, I'm going to tell you something. There is way more to life than just kicking people. And it's fun. It's fun getting in there and scrapping, but there's way more to life than that. And my advice to you is fill in the gaps right now. Find out what else is out there. Now, I'm not saying give up on martial arts, not by a long shot, but right now, you don't have to put all of your eggs in one basket, if you will. What else are you interested in? And you might think, I'm not interested in anything else except Taekwondo, and proving Taekwondo is awesome. And I get it. I felt like that for a very long time, and I know a bunch of other guys who did too. You know, Taekwondo was my first martial art, and I loved it, and I still do. I think it's cool. But for a long time, I wanted to be the Taekwondo guy in kickboxing, and the Taekwondo guy in Muay Thai, and the Taekwondo, I can't even say that phrase, the Taekwondo guy in MMA. But man, there's something much more valuable than that, which is be you in Taekwondo, or you in kickboxing, or you in MMA, or whatever it is that you're doing. I had this experience recently. I uploaded this video of me sparring with my student Linji, this dude from Japan who does Bagua and Tai Chi Chuan and Shin Yi Kung Fu styles. And we did this sparring session where he's trying to use strictly Bagua techniques, and I'm just kickboxing normally. And while we were doing this, I was reviewing the footage. And his movement was very, very linear because Bagua is very much about trapping, getting into that infighting range. And if you have a squirrely opponent like me who's just circling around you and running away and just dancing around you and all this, that's difficult to do. And so out of frustration, he marched straight forward, kind of Ronda Rouseying. Same thing she tried to do with Holly Holm, and that didn't work very well when she was zipping around her. And I had this feeling like, you know what? There's this Bagua form, where you move around in circles and do like this sort of thing with your hands, and essentially you're constantly changing direction. We'll get back into Taekwondo in a bit, but let's talk about this for a minute. And so we started doing these drills. I said, all right, Linji, you wanna take my back, okay? Because that's the goal in Bagua, is move around, get behind the other guy, okay? But I'm gonna be squirrely. If you take a step forward or 2 steps forward, what does that do? It tells me to move back. It tells me there's danger coming, so I'm going to move away from the danger. So I want you to do exactly what that form teaches. If you have to take more than 2 steps forward, change direction. Stop and change direction. Either rock back, shift sideways, something like that, just like that basic form that you're always doing. And with that reference point, he was like, aha, light bulb went off. And I'll tell you what happened. I stopped trying to teach him to be me, to fight like me, and started trying to teach him to fight like him. Because what does he love? He loves Bagua, he loves Shin Yi, he loves Tai Chi Chuan. And he's got that as this reference point in his mind. And as soon as he understood the reference, he started moving differently. Instead of Ronda Rouseying, marching straight forward, as soon as he recognized, 2 steps forward, change direction, just like the form. 2 steps forward, change direction, just like the form. And what does that do? It invites the other guy to come in. And something magical happens. Then you bridge the gap without forcing it, and then you can trap. And all that cool stuff, just like the forms. And then suddenly, this thing that didn't seem like it worked, works. So, long story short, Linji learned something about fighting like Linji, and Ramsey learned something about teaching and coaching Linji to bring out himself instead of to represent Bagua or to represent MMA or to represent kickboxing or some style. And I thought that was really cool. And I started thinking, man, who else can I do this with? And the most important person to do that with is you. So take this time. If you love martial arts and maybe there's nothing else that you love. So there are people like that. Like my wife, for example. She doesn't have a lot of hobbies. She has a few, and she sticks to those. And if she couldn't do those few things that she loves, then she'd probably fall into a funk too, like, man, what am I going to do now? So I get it. So if you can, do some film studies right now. If you can't compete, get involved in another way. Do some film studies, because that's going to help you improve. The most important person to do a film study on is yourself. So if you have competition footage, training footage, pour over that. And watch those matches or those training things 3 times. Once, watch yourself. Twice, watch the other guy. 3rd time through, watch the space in between you. And ask questions and find the answers along the way. And if you don't have any of your own, then watch other people and do film studies on those. And you're going to learn a whole bunch of things so that when you finally get back into competition, you'll know all kinds of things you didn't know before. You'll be able to try out all kinds of new things you didn't understand before. Not necessarily new techniques, but new ideas, new ways of understanding old ideas. So that form, which before was just a funky little dance, suddenly clicks and you have that light bulb moment. You're like, oh, yeah, that thing I was trying to do before, that square peg I was trying to fit through a round hole, I'm going to use the round peg instead, and now it's going to work. So I hope that helps. Bit of abstract thought there. But step outside the box. Think abstractly. Thanks for the question. Now get out there and train. Our next question comes from our friend Jamaican, who says his winter break lasts 1 month and he was considering going to an MMA gym. He says, is 1 month long enough to learn the basics of striking and defending, and can I expect a substantial improvement in my fitness level? Okay, short answer, no, but do it anyway, because it will help you, and it's going to be a great experience. If you have a month to train in mixed martial arts, cool, do it. Will you become a proficient master of the basics and the fundamentals? No, but you're going to learn a lot about them, especially if you're consistent. Now, I made a video a while back titled, How much jiu-jitsu can you learn in a month or something like that? And I feature my student Karen, who has been training for about 1.5 months, and she trains every day, just about every day. Every time there's a class, she's here, with a few exceptions. And as a result, she's improved a lot, like a whole lot. And I had a few people watch this video and they're like, wow, she moves really, really well for somebody who's trained for just 1 month. And a lot of that is the fact that when she's training, I watch her like a hawk and I pay attention to where she needs to improve on. A lot of people ask me, hey, do you have a curriculum? Do you have a syllabus that you follow at your gym? And the answer is no. I watch my students like a hawk and I see what they need to improve on, and then we focus on that. In fact, I'm making a whole video about that, sparring with my student Kevin. He's getting ready for a fight, and there's a lot he's got to learn before he's ready to sign up for that. So it's about the process of learning, sparring, watching the footage, milling over that, doing film studies on that, and figuring out how do we fix this hole in the game, 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 and focus on those things one at a time. And that takes time. But not just your time, it takes your coach's time. Now there's a big difference between an instructor and a coach. Now I do both. I instruct classes, but I also coach my students. And in fact, that's my main role here, is I'm a coach. Meaning it's a very hands-on approach, a very individualistic approach. It's not about just cramming numbers of people in here. It is about exploring the potential of the people who are in here and helping them rise to the task and win fights. So how much will you learn in a month? Well, it depends on a bunch of factors. It depends on what you put into it, okay? Because somebody like Karen, who is that dedicated, You know, even if she went to the lousiest gym with the crappiest teacher ever, who had no interest in coaching her, who just showed her some moves or whatever and said, all right, now go spar, good luck, have fun. And that's the end of my involvement in that process. With her consistency, she would still improve and get something out of that. As much as close, detailed focus and attention from the coach who is coaching her to improvement, no, but she'd still get something out of that. So how much will you improve in a month? A lot of variables there. But should you do it? Absolutely yes. Thank you for the question. Now get out there and train for a whole month and then keep doing it afterward if you can. And if you can't, find a way to do it anyway. Our next question comes from our friend Brendan Jackson. He says he's 19 years old and he started teaching some boxing classes. And he's had some trouble teaching people who have a sport background or lift weights. And it seems like teaching them how to box just doesn't really seem to click, but people who've never trained before seem to just get it and pick it up more easily. And he wants to know if I've had this experience. He specifically asks, have you ever found it difficult to train people in boxing or mixed martial arts who have prolonged experience with other non-combat sports or people who are generally non-athletic? Okay, put this down and it back. I've actually experienced the opposite and found the opposite to be true for myself. And I think a lot of that comes down to how you coach and how you train. Because there are so many variables in pedagogy, the art of teaching. And you can have a world-class fighter who's like the best fighter in the world who can be the lousiest teacher on the planet. And, the polar opposite can be true. A guy who's absolute garbage at fighting or has never had a fight in his life before can be a world-class coach. Ooh. Man, Ray Arcel, for example. I'm not saying he was lousy in any way, shape, or form. He was one of the greatest boxing coaches of all time. I mean, he coached guys like Roberto Duran. I mean, man. But Ray Arcel, the dude never boxed. But he understood something about boxing that allowed him to coach this great champion fighter. So, again, I've experienced the opposite to be true. I find, especially with very specific sports, like rugby. When I have a rugby player come in here, and I've got a lot of rugby players come into my gym to train, I find they click with grappling right away. And that's the great thing about mixed martial arts as opposed to boxing, because you can kind of pick and choose where to get an anchor, a foothold in. So a rugby is a lot like takedowns. It's a lot like wrestling right from the get-go. And so there's this reference point, like, hey, a rugby tackle is a lot like a power double leg takedown. And so that clicks. They're like, oh, I just need to make this adjustment and this adjustment, set it up this way, and now I can do basically that same movement. However, teaching a rugby player how to box, that's a different story. I had this dude from Switzerland who used to play soccer professionally, football for you non-Americans. And he came in here and I started teaching how to kickbox. And kicking technique in soccer is totally different than kicking technique in kickboxing. Way different. But he took to it like a fish to water. And I'll tell you why, because he had a high degree of kinesthetic bodily intelligence. And he knew how to train at a professional level. And so he was able to take his professional level training and apply that same work ethic to kickboxing, and so he got good at kickboxing. So I got this relatively new student, this Chinese girl named Karen, and you've seen her in a couple of videos, and she's only been training for about a month and a half now. And her only training before this was tennis. And when I found out she was a tennis player, I was teaching her a kickboxing lesson one day, I realized, oh, there's a reference point that I can use. And so I started giving analogies and references to ways that she was already familiar with moving. And so she could translate those forms, if you will, into kickboxing technique. And it worked beautifully. And she's improved massively, not just in boxing, kickboxing, and jiu-jitsu, but as an all-around mixed martial artist, and I'm so impressed with that. So a big part of the responsibility, I would say the biggest part of the responsibility lies on you rather than them. Because man, I've been coaching mixed martial arts, the sport of mixed martial arts, for about 12 years now. And I've taught martial arts for, man, almost 20 years. Just different martial arts, taekwondo, karate, and things like that. But yeah, when I started out, I thought I knew what I was doing. And looking back, when I started out, I wasn't a great coach. I wasn't a terrible coach, but I wasn't a great one. And I made a lot of mistakes, and I got frustrated, and when I started out, I would blame it, especially when I was a younger guy. I would blame my students' failures on them, rather than think, okay, what else could I have done to help them solve this problem? How else could I have approached this problem? And that's a super, super important thing for a coach to consider. You know, even with the most difficult student, I had this really, really difficult student once. There was this girl, and man, she was this feisty vegan girl who would just contest everything, and it was weird. It was weird coaching her because I had a hard time getting through to her. But every once in a while, there would be like these moments where we would click and stuff would happen and be like, okay, it's happening now. We understand how this works, and we're progressing. But then there would be like this roadblock, and it was a puzzle to figure out as a coach, like, how can I teach this person? And you know, I'm not going to say it worked out in the end. It didn't. She got frustrated and left the gym, like, okay, I'm done with this, going somewhere else. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe that's for the best. Not every coach is able to reach every person. So maybe you don't know how to teach a weightlifter how to box. I've taught plenty of weightlifters how to box and grapple and fight and do mixed martial arts. And I've taught plenty of people who had no idea how to move their bodies at all, who didn't do any movement besides walking, sitting down, standing up, typing at their computer, all hunched over, and driving in their car maybe. And that's all the movement they do in the day. So when you're faced with something like that, you got to approach it from a different angle. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Did you play any sports? Did you lift weights or any of those things? Were you engaged in physical culture outside of martial arts or boxing before you started boxing? If the answer is no, I'm going to tell you, you're probably drawing on your own experience to teach these people. And so when you see somebody coming from the same background as you, somebody who didn't lift weights or didn't play a sport, and then you're getting into boxing, you're like, oh, I can relate to that. And so I will teach them the way that I learned. Whereas if you had a weightlifting background, or you had a football background, or a rugby background, or a tennis background, or something like that, you might tend to gravitate more toward teaching people with a similar background. So just start asking some questions and start looking for reference points, and understand that you've got to invest as much time and effort and years and hours, endless hours, into the art of coaching as you do into the art of fighting. Because it's a whole unique skill set that you got to learn. Next question. We've got a question from Alejandro, who says, hey Ramsey, I have a question. Cool, I got an answer. Are there any quotes you've come across that have made you think that is a good wisdom, or have given you inspiration or insight in regard to your training, fighting, coaching, or life in general? I like the way you use quotes from the Bible or Chinese sayings, for example, glass heart, to give insight we can use in our own journeys to become better fighters and better people. Thank you for all your videos. Hey, thank you, Alejandro. So, yeah, the first quote that comes to mind is from one of my favorite songs, a song called "Godspeed the Right." It is a religious song. And I don't remember which verse it is, but there's this line that says, like the great and good in story, if we fail with glory. Godspeed the right. Like the great and good in story, if we fail with glory. And man, I love that so much. I love that so much. Why? Because every last one of us is going to fall, and we are going to fail, and we are going to fall down on our face in the mud, and we're going to have to lift ourselves back up. I had this teacher in high school who taught band. He was the band teacher. And I played the clarinet and then the bass clarinet and the saxophone and a few other instruments I learned how to play in high school. And something about clarinet players is the clarinet's kind of drowned out with the other instruments in the orchestra or the symphonic band. It's not really a loud one, doesn't really stand out very much. And so it's really easy, if you're not a good clarinet player, to just sort of play really quiet because you're afraid to make a mistake, especially when you're in high school and you're still learning the instrument. And Mr. Lee, the band teacher, he said, listen, guys, if you're going to make a mistake, own it. Play it loud. Make the mistake big. Why? So that we can fix it. Because if you hide your mistakes, what happens? We can't fix them. So like the great and good in story, if we fail with glory. I love that so much. It brings tears to my eyes whenever I sing it. Now that prayer again repeated, Godspeed the right. Ne'er despairing, though defeated, Godspeed the right. Like the great and good in story, if we fail with glory. Godspeed the right. Why does that inspire me? Because I've tasted failure so many times. And every time, every single time, ultimately, it's been a glorious experience. And it can be for you too if you let it, if you own that failure. If you allow that to become a teaching moment, then you too can fail with glory.